Hey everyone, my name is Megan Todora, and I'm one of the ECS career coaches. I want to welcome you to the virtual interviewing etiquette presentation presented by Johnson Career Services. We're going to cover the different types of interviewing and discuss what to expect and how to prepare so that you can feel confident for your job interviews. But before we get started, let's do a little activity. Okay, take a second to pause the video and scan this QR code. It's going to lead you to a one question survey to help us learn more about your previous experience and knowledge of interviewing. Thank you for participating in that survey. Now, let's get into some of the preparations for your interview. So, the first step in preparing for the interview is to review the company website and job description. And this is part of doing your homework. That means knowing the company and knowing the job. You're sure to impress your interviewer if you're able to demonstrate a good amount of interest and knowledge about their company. And make sure that you review your resume and any other materials that you use to apply with. Your interviewer might ask you specific questions about these documents, so you just want to make sure that you remember what you put on them. It's a good idea to search up frequently asked interview questions for the job that you're applying for, because once you know the majority of questions that could be asked, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable coming up with some answers. And also, it'll help you avoid getting surprised by certain questions. And also, think about which stories and experiences you want to share in your interview. Like when you're responding to these questions, think about which stories will help you demonstrate your skills, your strengths, and your accomplishments best. And of course, be sure to practice for the interview. You can do this with friends or with family or even out loud to yourself. And definitely feel free to make a mock interview appointment with ECS Career Services. We're always happy to help you. After applying to a job, you'll receive a phone call or possibly an email for each stage of the interview. And you may have multiple interviews, so be prepared for a process that may take several weeks. The first interview is generally a screening interview, and this is where they're going to ask you interpersonal based questions and are more focused on getting to know you. In the later interviews, they tend to focus on the more technical questions, which test your knowledge and skills of the company's industry. They may even ask you to apply the technical knowledge through a demonstration. Interviews come in a couple of different formats. You might do a one on one interview or a panel interview with multiple people, or an MMI, which stands for multi mini interview, meaning you would perform multiple short interviews through a small series of stations all in one day. So an interviewer is going to request an interview via email or via phone. And if it is over the phone, then you want to make sure that you have your voicemail box set up so that if you're not available when they call and you miss that call, then they're able to leave a message and you're able to get back with them. And make sure that your voicemail message is professional and appropriate. You don't want to leave any bad impressions with that. And then also, if you're selected for multiple interviews, make sure that you make a point to brush up on new unexpected questions and prepare new questions to ask the interviewer each time. Be prepared to answer what you've learned about the company since your last interview. They'll expect you to continue researching the position you're applying for because it doesn't stop with the first interview. Now let's move on to tips about completing your interview. For your interview, you're going to want to arrive early, at least 15 minutes, and maybe even more if you're worried about the commute. Make sure that you know where you're going, not only by the map, but also which building or room that you need to get to as well. Try and figure this out well ahead of time because you don't want to be stressing out about it before your session. And be sure to wear professional attire to make a good first impression. We'll talk a little bit more about dress code later in the presentation. And prepare all of your materials beforehand so that you know exactly what you're going to be bringing with you. Things like your resume, a notepad, thank you notes, or breath mints, or anything else that you might need. And be sure to prepare your questions well in advance so that you already have an idea of what you want to know about your interviewer or the company. And we'll talk more to this later in the presentation as well. And since so many interviews are virtual now, let's talk about a couple of tips for online interviews. Check your software. Make sure your computer and apps like Zoom or Teams are up to date. You wouldn't want to be late because of an unexpected automatic update. Make sure your internet is working well and relocate if necessary. Plug into an Ethernet cable if possible to be extra safe. Double check that your desktop background and applications are all appropriate. You want to make sure that there's nothing awkward on your screen if you need to screen share with the interviewer. Check your sound system beforehand so that there are no awkward mic or speaker checks during the beginning of the interview. And also make sure that your background noise is at an appropriate level. You don't want any pets or people in the background. And turn off all of your notifications so that you don't receive any loud noises or pop ups on your screen. So, what exactly should you bring to an interview? If your interview is in person, make sure you map out that location beforehand so that you know exactly when to leave to arrive early and you have a copy of the map in case you get lost. Bring a notepad for any important notes that you want to make during the discussion. You should also bring a copy of your resume to give to the employer so they can have one on hand. If your interview is virtual, then you'll also want to have your resume ready to share online if needed. And just like in the virtual tips on the previous slide, be sure to turn off your phone, smartwatch, and computer notifications. There's nothing worse than getting a loud notification ping in the middle of an interview. It's going to make you appear rude and unprepared, and it might even distract you from responding or distract the person from listening to you. So it's better to just turn them off altogether so there's no risk. All right, let's get into the interview attire, and this goes for virtual interviews too. I know it can be tempting when you're online to just wear a professional top and pair it with your pajama bottoms or sweatpants because it's comfortable. But even if no one's going to see, be fully dressed in professional attire. It's going to boost your confidence. So dress well, but dress comfortably. Interviews are not the time to try out a new outfit or to wear something that's going to be looking great but feeling uncomfortable. And avoid flashy attire or accessories because you don't want to be remembered for your clothing. You want to be remembered for your great personality. And be sure to use good hygiene and be well groomed. A good tip is to dress one level higher than you would expect to dress if you already had the job. So, a good idea would be to wear a dress blazer or a suit and pair it with a button down shirt and tie or a nice blouse. You can wear dress pants, or if you wear a skirt or a dress, just make sure it's an appropriate length, so around knee length. Wear comfortable shoes and don't wear heels over 3 inches and don't wear sneakers, even if they look nice, because they're going to be too casual. Beards and facial hair should be well groomed and keep makeup, nails, and accessories light and simple. The next thing I want to discuss is the tell me about yourself question. This is one of the most frequently asked questions at interviews, so it's really important to have a good response prepared. And this is where you would use your elevator pitch. So the three components that you want to aim to follow are who you are, which is your name and your degree, what your qualifications are, so 2 to 3 skills or relevant experiences that you've developed, and then why you want to work for this company. And this part is your chance to make a connection with the recruiter and tell them what makes you a great candidate for the position. Now, here are a few example questions you might anticipate in an interview. What are your strengths? Be prepared to talk about 3 strengths for this question. However, you do want to follow directions, so be sure to match the number of strengths that your interviewer is asking for if they specify a number. You'll also want to tell them how you utilize these strengths in your academic or professional environment. So don't only explain what the strength is, but how you see it in yourself as well. Tell me about a time when slash what would you do if. This question can be used in several different manners. It may be tell me about a time you experienced conflict, or tell me about a time you saw a project through to completion, or what would you do if you disagreed with a coworker? Your interviewer asks these questions to gain an understanding of your work style and problem solving skills. So the best way to answer them is to talk about a specific story. Use the STAR method. The STAR method stands for situation, task, action, result. The situation is the context, when and where it happened. The task is the problem or situation that needed to be addressed. The action is the steps or actions you took to achieve the task or solve the problem. And the results is the outcome of your actions. And this part should always be positive. You only want to share positive outcomes because you want them to see you as someone who will be a positive additive to their work environment. Next, how would you explain a technical idea to someone who is not familiar with the terminology? They may ask you this directly, which is a good time to use that STAR method again. However, they may also give you a specific technical term to explain to test your abilities. If this is the case, use clear and simple language. Avoid using the industry lingo. If you can use an analogy, this can be a great method to help. The point of this question is to make sure your communication skills are strong enough that you can interact with clients or other professionals outside of your field. Which type of projects have you worked on, and please provide an example. Now, if you're early in your career search, you may feel you don't have a lot to talk about, so reflect on this one to be sure that you have a couple of projects you could discuss if asked. You can use work projects, academic projects, or even personal projects. Just make sure that you provide an in depth answer. This question can speak to not only your analytical skills, but also your communication and leadership skills if it involves working with others. So keep this in mind when answering it. And the final question I want to discuss is what is your weakness? This question is a negative implication, which refers to any type of question that seems to refer to an uncomfortable or negative experience that can be difficult to talk about, such as tell me about a time you failed, or how would you deal with a difficult client? To answer this question, be honest but thoughtful about what you say. You want to show you can admit fault or shortcomings and that it doesn't change how excellent of a candidate you are. You'll also need to provide a positive outcome for this type of question. So if you're addressing your weakness, finish this question by discussing an active strategy you use to improve in this area. For example, if you struggle with time management, talk about how you utilize calendars and to do lists to show that you're always able to complete tasks efficiently and on time. Towards the end of your interview, most employers are going to ask if you have any questions for them. And you're going to want to have about 5 questions prepared, but you only want to ask 3 to 4 max. The purpose of preparing some extra questions is because sometimes your questions will get answered during the interview, so you just want to make sure you have something to ask when they prompt you for questions. A couple of examples of questions you could ask are: what is the work environment like? What are some challenges that could occur within this role? What can I expect during the first year of this job? And what are the next steps in the interview process? And that's always a good one to end on so that you can start anticipating when you might hear back from them. Questions to avoid asking: you will want to avoid anything that heavily emphasizes salary. If you do want to ask about the salary, just be sure to save it towards the end of the questions to avoid putting too much weight on it. Also, avoid any negative tones to your questions, like, what do you like least about this role? You want the interviewer to feel that you're excited and eager about the role rather than looking for the negative sides of it. Don't ask any questions that can be easily found online. An example of this is, what would I be doing on a typical day? You should already know the answer to this because it's likely explained on the company website and job description. So instead, you might ask, what can I do to be successful in this position? And lastly, avoid asking questions that might reflect negatively on yourself. The example provided here is, when can I expect to hear back from the hiring committee as I want to apply to other jobs? This question could be seen as a little pushy and overly blunt. You want to make sure that the company feels like they're important to you. So be careful if you choose to discuss your other job applications with them. It's usually a good idea to keep that information on the vague side. After your interview, be sure to send a thank you email or note to your interviewers. You should do this for every stage of the interview, and if you had multiple people interviewing you, send a thank you note to all of them. You'll want to personalize these so they are unique to each person you spoke with or the discussion you had with them. Send this within 24 hours of completing the interview. I hope this information has been helpful to you, and thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, please contact megan.todora@utdallas.edu or give us a call at ECS Career Services. Please scan the QR code to fill out a survey and record your attendance for this presentation. Thank you.